Since Ofcom activated the Online Safety Act's first enforcement powers this month, 34 adult sites are already under formal investigation for skipping age checks, while Spotify is threatening to zap accounts that don't selfie verify their birthdays. Users are very unimpressed so far. So nearly 400,000 signatures landed on Downing Street in 5 days so far, calling the rules "nanny net gone wild" was one of the quotes. Now, most of these issues are focusing around the services that block under 18s from porn, explicit music, and even Xbox chats, forcing rigorous age checks every time they use it. Now, many platforms now turn to biometric age estimation. Users can scan their faces, software guesses their age, and matches it, or can match an official ID as well. Now, critics warn this piles highly sensitive facial templates into commercial databases, often run from the US. Now, false matches, unequal accuracy for darker skins, and lockouts for adults lacking ID, which affects millions of people. Now, campaigners fear creep. Once mass face capture is normalized, police or advertisers could demand access beyond child protection and erode basic privacy rights. Now, my cat is playing at my feet and scratching at things, so I don't know if you can hear that, so I do apologise. But Nigel Farage has vowed to scrap the act on day one, prompting Cabinet Minister Peter Kyle in an interview to claim he's in effect on the same side as Jimmy Savile. A reference to child safety provisions Farage says are virtue signalling drivel. Let's take a look at the clip.
I see that Nigel Farage is already saying that he's going to overturn these laws. So, we have people out there who are extreme pornographers, peddling hate, peddling violence. Nigel Farage is on their side. Make no mistake about it, if people like Jimmy Savile were alive today, he'd be perpetrating his crimes online. And Nigel Farage is saying that he's on their side.
Well, just to be sort of very clear, I'm not on Jimmy Savile's side. I thought it was an absolutely appalling thing for him to say. Probably shows you just how much trouble they're in as a government. And a very stupid thing to say, given that his own party leader, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, of course, faced a barrage of criticism for not prosecuting Jimmy Savile when he was in charge of the Crown Prosecution Service, and subsequently apologised to the nation.
Now, it's rather funny, isn't it, that he's mad at being compared to Jimmy Savile and then tells a lie about Keir Starmer. And I don't like defending Keir Starmer, but we know this has been debunked. He had nothing to do with the case. It's not how the system works. Obviously, that lie was originally peddled by Boris Johnson in Parliament years ago. And many reform people have repeated it multiple times. So, for me, like comparing him to this for that, obviously it's not equivalent. It's not equivalent. But then being like, don't compare me to that, and then just peddle out a complete lie about Jimmy Savile. Now, meanwhile, companies are scrambling for compliance. Meta pilots passport light ID checks. Smaller platforms are just going quiet and geo-blocking sites to the UK. Users companies are trying to dodge fines because they can be fined up to 10% of global turnover if they're not compliant. And even the NHS is weighing in. They're saying medics are warning that losing WhatsApp groups could send patient handovers back to pager error chaos, because some of the powers that are coming into effect that haven't fully yet could also affect things like this. Now, the government's explainer insists the act is about stopping illegal content, protecting kids, and giving users an easy report button. Not about, reading your meme chats, but there will be provisions in the act where it is possible that the government could get into some of our chats. And again, this is very scary stuff. Now, the bottom line, the Online Safety Act has officially gone live, and so has the culture war around it. Now, brace for a lot more of this, because a lot more is about to come, and it's not really going anywhere at all. Nofal, is Nigel Farage Jimmy Savile?
Yeah, I cannot speak. I don't want to get sued. But in all seriousness, I think it was a silly comment to make, because there are genuine fears about the online safety bill, and so I think you're almost seeing like the liberal cover up of expanding surveillance as, oh, if you are against this, you're a paedophile, and then the far right going, actually no, don't you dare call me a paedophile, because here's insert X lie that actually the left defends paedophiles. It's ridiculous. But if we look at the online safety bill as a whole, I think it really mirrors surveillance technology and surveillance repression in the name of protecting children. And you have to be very skeptical when people say protecting children in the government, because they're almost never protecting children. this is very similar in my mind to things like Prevent, which are rolled out, genuinely or not, to, protect kids, stop radicalization, but end up actually enforcing racist stereotypes and hurting minorities such as Muslim children, and smearing them as terrorists. And I think the problem with the online safety bill that we've seen is, historically, when we are talking about protecting kids, the first people that end up being harmed by this sort of stuff are like the LGBT community, for example. Mental health forms have been inaccessible. Forums for minors, which by the way are banned from HRT now in some aspects, are no longer able to talk about their access to healthcare. And just generally speaking, if you are a kid who cannot speak about their mental health concerns in general, but you've been told right now that you're able to vote, how ridiculous is it that you can't access things like that online, where maybe you can't access it in real life? What is instead going to happen is, if you are a kid, and I've spoken to people that are 16 about their opinions on this, if you're seeing the state take away your little treats, your toys, not actually helping you, you're going to be pushed somewhere else, and you're going to look for a more radical idea or a radical message on how to solve the issues you're facing. And that's where we see the rise of the far right online. And more importantly, when it comes to things like pornography, you're going to see more extreme websites being able to be accessed via banning, porn sites, the 30 or so that they've talked about. And so I think this really represents, and Reform have capitalized brilliantly off this, unfortunately, the ability to groom young children, weirdly enough, talking about protecting children. But this is actually going to help for the far right to groom young children, to make them look like the liberal state are their enemy, and not in the good way, but more so that they want to repress everything that you're talking about, and instead you have to come and flock to our ideology. So I think, maybe is it well intentioned? Sure, maybe. In the world we live in, is it going to be used for the right intentions? Absolutely not. Will the left and other minorities be the first ones to face this? Absolutely yes. And I think, if anything, it leaves children in more dire state than actually protecting them. And if you really want to talk about protecting kids, then we need to look at things like digital rights, and looking to fund services that are chronically underfunded, which can actually help them.
It does beg the question, though, like, what is the answer and what is the solution then? Because I used to be completely against ID or verifying who somebody is online for a various amount of arguments. Like, one of them was the idea that there are people who need to be protected from certain things, like the idea of whistleblowers contacting journalists online, and they have to use like an anonymous account to do so. That's a very important part of democracy, right? Being able to access journalists in different ways and being able to contact them without the fear that you can just be tracked down by the government or any of these things. I have moved away from that simply because of the spread of the far right conspiracy theories and the damage that's done to the world, specifically on social media. I think where I kind of stand right now is that, there are softwares and systems available where you can get verified and none of the data at all is actually stored anywhere in any way. And people can talk about a slippery slope. I think for social media, I would like to see some sort of verification of who people are, specifically because of foreign interference. We saw obviously foreign interference about Southport in terms of some foreign accounts trying to stoke violence as well. There's issues with Telegram groups and stuff, which we can talk about a little bit later on in the next story, just because of the spread of that. And it's not the fact that I want to be able to know who everybody is online myself. It's just a case of, if somebody is doing something that is online, that they can still be held accountable. Meaning, right now, if you publish something in a newspaper, right, you know who it is, they can be sued, they can be held accountable. But when somebody's posting online specifically about complete fake news, something that's libelous, something that's potentially illegal, you can't always really at all even sometimes find out who that person is. And I think because of the violence that we're seeing, personally, I'm for social media verification. Doesn't mean it has to be public. It just means that they can be found out who they are, and that is it. And that's where I want to leave it. For everything else, I don't know what the solution is. Like, how do you think, obviously respond to what I've just said about social media, but just everything else, like, what do you think is the best approach for all of this?
I think it speaks to a larger question on how to really fight the far right and the spread of fascism. And I think we need to take a look at, although things like surveillance can help in the short term, the battle against the far right and the rise of populist narratives from the right have to also be fought, via organizing on the ground, but also pressuring and holding our politicians to account, and also having those organizations that talk about digital rights, for example, coincide with the rise of sorry, where was I? Coincide with the rise of fighting misinformation. And Nordic countries do this really good thing where they have an educational program where they actually teach media literacy. I know, shocker, but they essentially teach their students in schools how to look out for misinformation, how to properly check sources, and more importantly, what do the sources actually talk about? Is it just purely emotions, feelings, themes, or is it facts? Is it statistics? And how do we reach statistics? And there's a wide range of incentivizing and mandating, children learning about sociological methods of research, but also along with that, political media literacy. I think the issue is when we rely on the state to do that for us as the left. Historically, what happens is it ends up biting us and it ends up harming us. So while I can understand the need for censorship, not censorship, ID verification for people alongside spreading far right misinformation on things like X, even TikTok nowadays. I think it's a short-term solution that won't come to the root cause of these issues. And I think we need to look at incentivizing the people that we're raising in our generations to actually combat and fight this. And I think it's more safe if we have these ideas out in the open, but we also have a strong narrative legislatively to push against that. Because in my experience and in my opinion, historically, is when we drive these narratives underground, it's not just harder to take track of them, but it's also harder to combat them because these people also get radicalized and go to underground networks. And we obviously see X right now, but in the early 2000s, it was the revival of far right forums. Nowadays, what we see are Telegram chats, which are extremely hard to monitor. And I think we need to focus on digital legislation in that regard.
Yeah, it is obviously a very complicated issue because we do have to balance freedoms. We have to balance what the government has access to, or even private companies, of course. We don't want that to be, either used or sold off or used in some sort of malign way. I'll be interested as well for people in the comments, please put in what you think your actual solutions could be around this. And again, I do think it's all well-intentioned, but it doesn't always, compute that way when it obviously goes through the actual mandates of what they're supposed to be. There was talk about Wikipedia might actually get flagged as something that's not accessible to people. From it was getting flagged as a certain category of websites. Obviously, it has information on everything. There's been reports of people not being able to access certain news on certain websites and forums because it was obviously something that was classified as adult content. And then we have to balance the idea of you obviously don't have a right to access the news, but I think we do have a right not to be interfered with by the government, right? The news doesn't have to be provided to us by that company or by a social media website that's facilitating it. But if a government is mandating that people can't access it out of nothing else, no illegal activity, so to speak, that's when obviously it starts to get troublesome, right? If you're trying to access a news website and it has one article about, I don't know, what's her name, the Bonnie Blue or something like that, and it flags up as actually to access this, you need to put in your ID because there's some information here about Bonnie Blue, then this is when obviously it starts to look pretty bad. Let's quickly talk about though, the idea of Labour's stance on this, because obviously this is a Tory legislation. I think it started all the way back in 2017 under Theresa May, and now it's finally gone through. It's been activated. It's in full power, and Labour seem to be completely and utterly fully defending it. And I just feel even though again it's done with the right intentions, it's a case of this is something that's going to make them even more unpopular and quite widely, right? I know it sounds, not to get too personal or dirty with it, but a lot of people watch porn. And now every time people are going to log into a porn website and they have to put in their ID or whatever it might be, they're going to think of Keir Starmer. They're going to think of the Labour Party. They're going to associate this government with the idea that they've made me do this and they're defending it. And that's just one aspect of it. So this is going to make them really unpopular, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the Keir Starmer kink is the last thing people want. But I think it speaks to how they think that this will genuinely help them fight the far right. This is Labour's idea of a online bill or a bill that they think, will be brilliant. We've just brought in the ability to vote for 16-year-olds, and this will help combat reform or far right narratives, and it may actually give a bigger ground for us to enter in and actually sweep up many votes perhaps. But I think it's just completely misaligned, and just like everything else Labour does, it's just completely not answering to people's material conditions. No one, like you said, wants to put their identification for small stuff like that, because it seems ridiculous, right? The amount of memes I've seen on TikTok already is they're calling it the Gooner ban or the Gooner tax. It's just ridiculous. In fact, I spoke to my younger cousins who are 16, and he's like, I'm not even a porn addict. I just want to listen to Spotify, and I don't want to put my ID in for it. So I think it's one of those things which is a narrative about how liberalism really fails to combat fascism, and in fact it actually emboldens it, because as we've seen, Farage is sort of winning the culture war here, and so are outlets like GB News, and I even saw The Sun, for example, The Rag, talk about this, and they are just making Starmer look like an utter buffoon, because you can't fight far-right narrative with this sort of thing. You need to center it back to concerns that people have about their everyday lives, about material conditions, about their bills, about their mental health, and especially for young people who are on the receiving end for so much of that, who don't feel like they have representation. This may even just see, Labour concede ground to reform in that regard.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.